and as long as there were people willing to nurture that growth, to tend to the seeds of change with patience, perseverance, and love, the story that began in a small-town park would continue to unfold, inspiring generations yet to come to take up the never-ending work of growing justice in their own lives and communities. For in Oakwood, and in the hearts of all those touched by its story, justice continued to grow, a living, breathing testament to the power of community, the strength of the human spirit, and the enduring hope that, together, we can create a more just and equitable world for all. As the last visitors left the park, Zoe found herself drawn once more to the memorial bench. She sat down, running her fingers over the weathered inscription. Justice grows here, just as she had done countless times before. But now, the words seemed to hold new meaning, their simple truth reverberating across time and space. And so, as darkness fell and the park grew quiet once more, the story of what happened when a cop arrested a black kid playing in the park continued to evolve. It had grown from a local incident into a global movement, from a moment of injustice into a beacon of hope. Yet at its core, it remained a deeply human story, a reminder of our capacity for growth, our ability to heal, and our shared longing for a world where justice is not just an ideal, but a lived reality. Delegates said their goodbyes, exchanging contact information and promises to stay in touch. But even as they dispersed, returning to their homes in far-flung corners of the globe, something intangible remained. A shared commitment to the ideals that had brought them together, a collective determination to keep the spirit of Oakwood alive in their own communities. He thought of all the children who had played in this park over the years, including his own daughter, and how each of them had, in their own way, carried forward the legacy of that pivotal moment. "You know what?" he said, giving the girl a warm smile. "I believe you will." As the sun began to set on the final day of the summit, casting long shadows across the park, there was a sense of both closure and new beginnings. It's about all of us, about what we can achieve when we stand up for each other and work together for change. The girl nodded solemnly, then broke into a wide smile. "When I grow up," she declared, "I'm going to help make the whole world like Oakwood." Jason felt his heart swell with a mixture of pride, hope, and a touch of bittersweet nostalgia. Jason Thompson, standing at the edge of the gathering, felt a tug on his sleeve. He looked down to see a young girl, no more than 7 or 8, gazing up at him with wide, curious eyes. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you the boy from the story?" Jason knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with the child. "I was," he said gently. "But the story isn't just about me. A story that reminds us that justice is not a destination we reach, but a path we walk together, step by step, day by day." As her words hung in the air, a soft breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the laughter of children playing nearby. And in that moment, past and present seemed to merge, the echoes of a frightened boy's cry blending with the joyful shouts of a new generation for whom the park had always been a safe space. Each stone represented a commitment to take the lessons of Oakwood back to their own communities, to continue the work of growing justice in their own contexts. As the last stone was placed, Zoe stepped forward once more. "What began in this park 50 years ago was not the end of a story, but the beginning of one," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "A story that belongs not just to Oakwood, but to all of us." It was a reminder that change, no matter how daunting, is always possible when people come together with courage, compassion, and a shared commitment to justice. As the summit drew to a close, delegates gathered once more in the park for a final ceremony. One by one, They came forward to add a small stone to a new monument being constructed next to the original memorial bench. But perhaps the most profound moments happened in the quiet interludes, over shared meals, during walks in the park, in late-night conversations that stretched into the early hours of the morning. It was in these moments that the true power of Oakwood's story became clear. It wasn't just a tale of one town's transformation, but a mirror in which people from all walks of life could see their own struggles and aspirations reflected. The gesture spread like a wave, until the entire gathering was linked in a physical manifestation of global solidarity. The summit unfolded over the next week, a whirlwind of workshops, panel discussions, and collaborative problem-solving sessions. Ideas flowed freely, connections were forged, and new initiatives were born. Today, we stand here not just to commemorate that moment, but to rededicate ourselves to the ongoing work of justice. As Zoe's words flowed, painting a vision of a world where every community could become a crucible of positive change, something remarkable began to happen. People in the audience, strangers from different corners of the world, began to reach out and clasp hands. Bennett, who insisted on standing despite his advanced age. As Zoe began to speak, a hush fell over the gathered crowd. 50 years ago, in this very park, a moment of injustice sparked a movement of transformation, she began, her voice carrying across the hushed gathering. There were community leaders from South African townships, civil rights activists from Eastern Europe, indigenous rights advocates from South America, and social entrepreneurs from Southeast Asia. Each brought their own stories of struggle and triumph, their own visions for a more just world. The summit opened with a powerful ceremony in the park. Zoe Thompson stood at the podium, flanked by her father Jason, the now retired Officer Reeves, and Mr. The park, still the heart of the community, underwent a thoughtful renovation. New interactive exhibits were installed, telling the story of the town's journey through multiple perspectives. The old playground equipment was replaced with an inclusive design that accommodated children of all abilities, a tangible symbol of the community's commitment to equality. As delegates began to arrive from across the globe, the air in Oakwood crackled with energy and possibility. We just have to keep planting the seeds. As Oakwood approached its 50th anniversary of the incident, the town began preparations for a global summit on community-driven social change. Leaders, activists, and scholars from around the world would converge on the small town that had become a beacon of hope and a laboratory for progress. In the weeks leading up to the summit, Oakwood buzzed with activity. Bennett, during one of their regular chats on the memorial bench, "I look at Zoe and all she's accomplishing, and I can hardly believe it. To think that all of this grew from that terrible day." Mr. Bennett, now in his 90s but still sharp as a tack, chuckled softly. "That's the thing about justice, Jason. You never know how far its roots will spread or what kind of fruit it will bear." Jason Thompson, now in his 50s, watched his daughters rise with a mixture of pride and awe. The scared 12-year-old boy who had once been handcuffed in a park had grown into a man who had helped reshape his community. And now, through Zoe, the ripples of that transformation were spreading further than he had ever dared to dream. "Sometimes," Jason confided to Mr. "Our story is universal because the hunger for justice is universal." Her words struck a chord with people around the world, from grassroots activists in bustling metropolises to community leaders in remote villages. The Oakwood model of community policing and civic engagement began to be adapted and implemented in diverse contexts, from the favelas of Rio de Janeiro to the suburbs of Stockholm. Her unique perspective, as both a child of Oakwood's transformation and a leader in her own right, made her a powerful voice in global conversations about equity, justice, and sustainable development. What happened in Oakwood wasn't just about one incident or one community, Zoe would often say in her talks. It's about the potential that exists in every community to confront its challenges, heal its wounds, and create a more just future. The town became a case study in resilience and transformative justice, its journey dissected in university classrooms and cited in international policy forums. Zoe Thompson, now in her 30s, found herself increasingly in demand as a speaker and consultant on community-driven social change. It was, in fact, just beginning, a living testament to the enduring power of hope, the strength of community, and the unquenchable human spirit that dares to dream of a better world and then works tirelessly to make that dream a reality. As the years rolled on, Oakwood's story continued to resonate far beyond its borders, touching lives in ways that no one could have predicted on that fateful day in the park. An era shaped by the wisdom of the past, the energy of the present, and the boundless potential of the future. An era in which the simple yet powerful message carved into a park bench, "Justice grows here," continued to take root, flourish, and bear fruit in ways that its original planters could scarcely have imagined. For in Oakwood, and in communities inspired by its example across the nation and around the world, the story of justice was far from over. As the impromptu gathering in the park began to disperse, people lingering to chat and reflect, there was a palpable sense of renewal in the air. The story had been passed on once again, its lessons reaffirmed, its call to action reignited in young hearts and old. And so, as stars began to twinkle in the velvet sky above, Oakwood stood poised on the threshold of a new era. The legacy of what happened when a cop arrested a black kid playing in the park had come full circle. It was no longer just a tale of past injustice overcome, but a living, breathing ethos that continued to shape the community's future. With each retelling, with each new generation that took up the mantle of progress, the story grew richer, deeper, more profound in its impact. "You already are, son," he said gently. "Every time you listen to this story, every time you choose kindness over fear, every time you stand up for what's right, you're helping justice grow." As if on cue, a warm breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the sweet scent of new blossoms. And there, in the gathering darkness of a park that had seen both the worst and the best of humanity, a new chapter in Oakwood's story began to unfold. When Zoe finally fell silent, the park was bathed in the soft glow of twilight. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, the young boy who had first asked for the story piped up, his voice filled with awe and determination. "When I grow up," he declared, "I want to help grow justice, too." A ripple of soft laughter and murmured agreement passed through the crowd. Jason stepped forward, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder, his eyes shining with pride and emotion. Among them were faces that had been part of Oakwood's story from the beginning. Jason Thompson, his hair now streaked with gray. Officer Reeves, leaning on a cane but standing tall. Mr. Bennett, his wizened face creased in a gentle smile. As the story unfolded, spanning decades of struggle and triumph, heartbreak and hope, a profound silence fell over the gathering. It was as if the very air was charged with the weight of history and the promise of the future. But it's also a story about a community that came together to make things right. As Zoe's words flowed, painting pictures of fear and courage, of conflict and reconciliation, of a community's journey towards justice, the boy listened with rapt attention. Other children, drawn by the story, began to gather around, sitting cross-legged on the grass, their eyes wide with wonder. Parents, noticing the growing crowd, drifted over as well. "More important than you know. Want me to tell you a story about this park?" The boy nodded eagerly, and Zoe sat down on the grass beside him. As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, she began to speak. Once upon a time, in this very park, something happened that changed everything. It's a story about a boy, not much older than you, and a police officer who made a mistake. My grandpa says this is the best park in the whole world. Zoe felt a lump form in her throat. Oh yeah, and why does he say that? The boy's brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to remember. He says it's because this is where people learn to grow justice. I don't really know what that means, but it sounds important. Zoe blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the simple profundity of the child's words. It is important, she said softly. Something about his solitary figure stirred a memory deep within her. Stories she had heard about her father as a child, about a time when a park wasn't always a safe place for a young black boy to play alone. Without really thinking about it, Zoe found herself walking over to the boy. Hey there, she said gently. Having fun? The boy looked up at her, his face breaking into a wide smile. Yeah, I love it here. She would sit on the memorial bench, running her fingers over the weathered inscription, feeling the weight of history and the pull of the future. One evening, as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the park, Zoe noticed a young boy playing alone near the swings. The event would include interactive workshops on emerging social justice issues, a hackathon for developing tech solutions to community challenges, and a series of intergenerational dialogues designed to bridge past, present, and future. In the weeks leading up to the anniversary, Zoe found herself spending more and more time in the park where it all began. But this time, the planning was led by Zoe and her peers, with guidance and support from the older generation. They envisioned not just a celebration of past progress, but a forward-looking gathering that would set the agenda for the next 30 years of community-driven change. What gives me the most hope, Bennett would say, his eyes twinkling with a mix of wisdom and mischief, is seeing how each generation takes the story and makes it their own. They're not just inheriting a legacy, they're actively shaping it. As Oakwood approached the 30th anniversary of the incident in the park, the town began preparations for another commemorative event. Elijah Bennett, well into his 80s but still sharp as ever, became a beloved figure to this new generation of activists. They sought his counsel not just on matters of law and policy, but on the intangible qualities of leadership, courage, empathy, and the ability to bring people together across lines of difference. Officer Dylan Reeves, now retired from active duty but still involved in police training programs, watched this new generation with a mixture of pride and awe. When I look at these kids, he often remarked, I see the true legacy of what happened in that park all those years ago. They're not just continuing our work. They're taking it to places we never could have imagined. As Zoe and her generation came into their own, they began to take on leadership roles within the community. They brought fresh energy and new ideas to Oakwood's institutions, from the police force to the town council. They pushed for policies that addressed emerging issues like artificial intelligence bias and the digital divide, ensuring that Oakwood remained at the forefront of the fight for equity in a rapidly changing world. They organized community gardens in underserved neighborhoods, coding boot camps for low-income youth, and campaigns to address the disproportionate impact of environmental degradation on communities of color. Their efforts caught the attention of national media, and soon, Oakwood found itself once again in the spotlight. But this time, it wasn't just for its past transformation. It was for its continued evolution, its ability to adapt and grow in the face of new challenges. We have to be the ones to plant the seeds. Zoe's work with New Growth brought a fresh perspective to Oakwood's ongoing journey. She and her peers recognized that the fight for racial justice was inextricably linked to other pressing issues of their time: climate change, economic inequality, and digital rights. By the time she entered high school, Zoe had become a formidable activist in her own right, founding a youth-led organization called New Growth that focused on environmental justice and its intersections with racial equity. "My dad's experience taught me that change is possible," Zoe often said in interviews. "But it also taught me that we can't wait for change to happen to us." They came of age in a world still grappling with injustice and inequality, but they approached these challenges with a unique perspective, one shaped by Oakwood's example of community-driven change. Among these children was Zoe Thompson, Jason's daughter, who grew up hearing her father's story not just as a personal narrative, but as a call to action. As the years continued to unfold, the story of Oakwood's transformation took on an almost mythical quality, not just within the town but across the nation. It became a parable of sorts, a tale told in classrooms and community centers, at dinner tables and social justice rallies, its message of hope and perseverance resonating with each retelling. The children who grew up hearing this story, the generation born after the incident, carried its lessons deep within their hearts, and somewhere in the soft darkness, a child turned to their parent and asked, "Can you tell me again about what happened in this park?" And so, the story was passed on once more, a torch of hope and responsibility handed from one generation to the next, ensuring that the lessons learned and the progress made would continue to light the way forward into a future bright with possibility. As the festival wound down and families began to make their way home, the park settled into a peaceful quiet. The memorial bench stood silent in the moonlight, its simple message, "Justice grows here," now imbued with 2 decades of lived experience. And somewhere in the soft darkness, a child turned to their parent and asked, "Can you tell me again about what happened in this park?" And so, the story was passed on once more, a torch of hope and responsibility handed from one generation to the next, ensuring that the lessons learned and the progress made would continue to light the way forward into a future bright with possibility. As the festival wound down and families began to make their way home, the park settled into a peaceful quiet. The memorial bench stood silent in the moonlight, its simple message, "Justice grows here," now imbued with 2 decades of lived experience. It serves as both a mirror and a window, reflecting how far we've come and offering a glimpse of how much further we can go. In playgrounds and police academies, in classrooms and courtrooms, in the hearts and minds of all who hear it, the story lives on, a persistent reminder that the arc of history bends not by itself, but through the collective will and effort of those who dare to imagine and work for a more just world. The melody carried on the evening breeze, drifting out beyond the park, beyond the town limits, a quiet but insistent call to all who would listen. This is what change looks like. This is what justice feels like. This is what's possible when we choose to write a new story together. And so, the story of Oakwood continues, not as a finished tale, but as an ongoing narrative of growth, challenge, and possibility. It had become a living, breathing testament to the possibility of transformation, a reminder that even the deepest wounds can be healed when people come together with courage, compassion, and a commitment to justice. As darkness fell and the festival lights twinkled to life, the circle of joined hands began to sway gently, voices rising in a soft, spontaneous song of hope and unity. People from all walks of life, longtime residents and newcomers, young and old, representing a rainbow of ethnicities and backgrounds, joined hands in a circle that grew larger and larger. In that moment, the true power of what had been achieved in Oakwood became clear. The story of what happened when a cop arrested a black kid playing in the park had become more than just a local legend or a case study in community policing. Families picnicked on blankets spread across the grass, sharing food and stories that crossed cultural boundaries. At various booths and exhibits, community organizations showcased their work, inviting festival goers to get involved in ongoing initiatives for social justice and community development. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, a spontaneous gathering began to form near the memorial bench. The true test of our progress is not how we celebrate our successes, but how we face our ongoing challenges. As the crowd dispersed to enjoy the festival, there was a palpable sense of both accomplishment and responsibility in the air. Children played on the swings where Jason had once been handcuffed, their laughter a reminder of the innocence that had been protected and the future that was being shaped. It taught me that true strength lies not in authority, but in humility and the courage to change. Mr. Bennett concluded the ceremony with words of both celebration and caution. "We've come so far," he said, looking out at the diverse faces before him. "But our journey is far from over. 20 years ago, we stood in this park as strangers, divided by fear and misunderstanding," Jason began, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "Today, we stand here as friends, as partners in the ongoing work of building a more just world." Officer Reeves, his hair now gray at the temples, spoke next. "What happened here changed me forever," he said, his voice thick with emotion. On the 20th anniversary of the incident in the park, Oakwood hosted its largest Unity Festival yet. People came from all over the country to participate, drawn by the town's reputation as a living laboratory of social progress. The festival opened with a powerful ceremony at the park. Jason Thompson, Officer Dylan Reeves, and Mr. Elijah Bennett stood together at the memorial bench, each placing a hand on the weathered stone as they addressed the gathered crowd. This influx brought new energy and ideas, further enriching the community's cultural tapestry. Yet, for all its progress, Oakwood never became complacent. Regular community forums continued to address ongoing challenges and emerging issues. The town remained vigilant against the creep of systemic bias, understanding that the work of creating a truly just society is never finished. Oakwood began hosting annual conferences on community-driven governance, sharing best practices and inspiring other towns and cities to reimagine their approach to public policy and community relations. As Oakwood's reputation grew, it began to attract new residents drawn by its commitment to equity and inclusion. Young families, retirees, and entrepreneurs alike were drawn to the town's ethos of active citizenship and mutual respect. Instead of devolving into adversarial debates, these meetings became forums for creative problem-solving, ultimately resulting in a revised plan that not only preserved the affected neighborhoods, but also invested in their revitalization. This approach to civic engagement caught the attention of urban planners and local government officials nationwide. The town's commitment to open dialogue and collaborative problem-solving began to influence how it approached other challenges, from education reform to environmental sustainability. When a proposed highway expansion threatened to displace several low-income neighborhoods, the community came together in a series of town halls reminiscent of those held in the wake of Jason's arrest. Elijah Bennett, now in his 70s but still sharp as ever, took great pride in mentoring this new generation of activists and changemakers. "What gives me hope," he often said, "is seeing how the ripples from that day in the park continue to spread. Each of you carries a piece of that story, and each of you has the power to write the next chapter." The impact of Oakwood's transformation extended far beyond the realms of policing and race relations. As the years passed, the children who had been Jason's age at the time of the incident grew into adults, many of them inspired by his example to pursue careers in law, social work, education, and community organizing. They became known as the Park Generation, a cohort of young leaders committed to carrying forward the lessons of that transformative moment. One particularly innovative program, spearheaded by Tanya Thompson, paired police cadets with local teenagers for a series of facilitated dialogues and team-building exercises. The initiative, dubbed Common Ground, helped break down stereotypes on both sides and fostered genuine understanding between future officers and the communities they would serve. Local schools incorporated the incident and its aftermath into their curriculum, using it as a springboard to discuss civil rights, civic responsibility, and the power of individual action. Students were encouraged to think critically about their own biases and to consider how they could contribute to building a more just and equitable society. The park where it all began became a sort of pilgrimage site for social justice advocates from around the world. Visitors would often leave small tokens of hope, painted stones, handwritten notes, or flowers near the memorial bench, creating an ever-changing testament to the enduring power of the story. A major studio optioned the rights to Jason's story, with plans to turn it into a feature film. The project sparked heated debates about representation and who had the right to tell such stories, ultimately leading to a groundbreaking collaboration between established filmmakers and emerging voices from the Black community. Back in Oakwood, life continued to evolve in beautiful and unexpected ways. It's about a community that refused to let fear and anger have the last word. Jason's words resonated far beyond the world of law enforcement. Corporate leaders, educators, and community organizers all found inspiration in Oakwood's story. Diversity and inclusion initiatives in workplaces across the country began to shift from mere compliance to active engagement, inspired by the town's example of turning crisis into opportunity. Even Hollywood took notice. His unique perspective, as both a victim of profiling and an advocate for systemic change, made him a powerful voice in the ongoing national conversation about race and policing. "What happened to me in that park was traumatic," Jason would often say in his speeches. But the real story isn't about that moment of injustice. It's about what we chose to do with it. In cities that adopted these practices, instances of police misconduct dropped significantly. More importantly, trust between law enforcement and minority communities began to grow, leading to increased cooperation and safer neighborhoods for everyone. Jason Thompson, now in his 30s and a rising star in the world of civil rights law, found himself increasingly in demand as a speaker and consultant. It's about being honest, being open to growth, and remembering that the badge doesn't separate us from the community. It connects us to it. This philosophy began to take root in police departments across the nation. Annual sensitivity training sessions were replaced with ongoing community engagement initiatives. Officers were encouraged to volunteer in local schools and youth centers, building relationships long before any crisis could occur. The impact was profound. Chief among the lessons they took away was the power of vulnerability and authentic dialogue. The image of Officer Dylan Reeves, standing before a packed town hall meeting, openly acknowledging his mistakes and committing to change, became emblematic of a new approach to police-community relations. "It's not about being perfect," Dylan would often say to visiting officers. It continued to evolve, touching lives in ways both big and small, weaving itself into the fabric of everyday life in the community and beyond. In the years that followed, Oakwood became known as a beacon of progressive policing and community engagement. Law enforcement agencies from across the country sent representatives to study the Oakwood model, eager to understand how a single incident had catalyzed such profound and lasting change. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, a child asks their parent to tell them once again the story of what happened when a cop arrested a black kid playing in the park. Not as a tale of fear, but as a legend of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the light of justice can shine through, illuminating a path towards a more perfect union, one community at a time. The story of Oakwood's transformation didn't end with nightfall or the close of the festival. As night falls on Oakwood Park, the laughter of children still echoes faintly in the air, a promise of a brighter tomorrow. The legacy of that day serves as a beacon of hope, a challenge to complacency, and a testament to the enduring power of community, compassion, and courage. It reminds us all that the arc of history, while long, can indeed bend towards justice, but only if we are willing to put our hands to the task, our hearts into the work, and our faith in each other. As the festival winds down and families begin to head home, the memorial bench stands as a silent sentinel, its engraved message catching the last rays of the setting sun. Justice grows here. And in Oakwood, as in communities across the nation inspired by its example, that simple truth continues to take root, flourish, and bear fruit for generations to come. It's a reminder that the most profound changes often start in the most unexpected places, like a sunny afternoon in a neighborhood park, where a community found the courage to confront its flaws and the strength to forge a new path forward. And there, in that moment of connection, the true power of their story becomes clear. It's not just about what happened on one day in one park. It's about what happens every day, in every interaction, when people choose understanding over fear, dialogue over division, and hope over hate. That when we stand up for each other, when we see the humanity in every person, we can create a community, a world, where justice isn't just an ideal, but a lived reality. As the applause washes over him, Jason's eyes find those of Officer Dillon and Mr. Bennett in the crowd. The three men exchange a look of understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they've shared, and the work that still lies ahead. Our work isn't done, he reminds the crowd, his voice carrying the weight of experience and the lightness of hope. There will always be challenges to face, biases to overcome, and injustices to right. But what we've learned, what we continue to prove every day, is that we're stronger together. It's a story that continues to unfold, not just in Oakwood, but in communities across the nation that have been inspired by its example. As Jason Thompson stands at the podium during one of these anniversary celebrations, looking out at the diverse crowd gathered before him, he's often struck by how far they've come. But he's equally aware of how far there is still to go. It's a hope born from the knowledge that even the most difficult challenges can be overcome when people come together with open hearts and a willingness to change. The story of what happened when a cop arrested a black kid playing in the park didn't end that day. In many ways, it was just the beginning, the first chapter in an ongoing narrative of growth, healing, and transformation. The park comes alive with music, food, and laughter as people from all walks of life come together to celebrate their shared humanity and recommit to the principles of justice and equality that have become the bedrock of their community. As the sun sets on these celebrations, casting a warm glow over the faces of young and old, newcomers and longtime residents, there's a palpable sense of hope in the air. For many, the true hero of the story isn't any one individual, but the collective spirit of a community that refused to let fear and misunderstanding drive them apart. It's a reminder that true change doesn't come from laws or policies alone, but from the hearts and minds of people committed to creating a better world. On the anniversary of that fateful day, Oakwood now holds an annual festival of unity. The key is to start the conversation, to be willing to face uncomfortable truths, and to work together towards a shared vision of justice and equality. As the years pass, the events of that day have taken on an almost mythical quality in Oakwood. Parents tell their children the story, not as a cautionary tale, but as an origin story of sorts, the moment when their community decided to become something better, something more just and inclusive. Delegations from cities large and small regularly visit, hoping to learn from Oakwood's example and adapt its strategies to their own unique challenges. But those who were there on that pivotal day are quick to point out that there's no one-size-fits-all solution to the complex issues of race, policing, and community relations. What worked for us might not work exactly the same way somewhere else, Jason often cautions when speaking to visiting groups. Documentaries and books chronicling the journey from that tense day in the park to the thriving, unified community of today have sparked similar movements in cities across the nation. As other communities grapple with their own incidents of racial profiling and police misconduct, many look to Oakwood as a model of what's possible when a community commits to honest dialogue and meaningful change. Officers are now a common sight at community events, not as enforcers, but as participants and neighbors. Young children in Oakwood no longer grow up fearing the police. Instead, they see them as allies and protectors. This shift in perception has led to a decrease in confrontations and an increase in cooperation, making the entire community safer and more harmonious. The story of Oakwood's transformation has caught the attention of filmmakers and authors. The sight of a police officer and a civil rights attorney working together to mentor young people serves as a powerful reminder of how far the community has come. But perhaps the most profound change is in the everyday interactions between police and the community they serve. The tension that once characterized these encounters has been replaced by a sense of mutual respect and understanding. The old playground equipment has been replaced with an inclusive design that accommodates children of all abilities. The walking paths now feature plaques highlighting local civil rights history, turning a casual stroll into an educational journey. On warm evenings, it's not uncommon to see Officer Dillon coaching a youth basketball team, with Mr. Bennett cheering from the sidelines. Tanya Thompson, Jason's mother, found a new calling as a community organizer, bringing together parents from diverse backgrounds to advocate for equitable education and youth programs. The parent-teacher meetings she once dreaded have become a forum for honest dialogue and collaborative problem-solving. Even the park itself has been transformed. What was once just a place for recreation has become a living symbol of community resilience and growth. But more importantly, how we responded as a community became a blueprint for positive change. It showed us that when we confront our biases, listen to each other, and commit to doing better, we can create a justice system that truly serves all people. The ripple effects of that day continue to spread, touching lives in unexpected ways. Elijah Bennett, the attorney whose intervention changed the course of that fateful day, has become a nationally recognized expert on community police relations. His firm now specializes in civil rights law, and he frequently consults with cities looking to implement reforms similar to those that transformed Oakwood. What happened in our park that day was a microcosm of a much larger problem. Bennett explains in a TED Talk that has garnered millions of views. "I thought I was just doing my job that day," Dillon often tells his classes, his voice heavy with the weight of hard-earned wisdom. But I've learned that our job isn't just about enforcing laws. It's about serving and protecting all members of our community, especially those who have historically been marginalized or feared us. True policing is about building trust, not instilling fear. Mr. Officer Dillon Reeves, too, has continued his journey of growth and redemption. Now a senior trainer at the police academy, he uses his experience as a cautionary tale and a roadmap for change. His courses on implicit bias and community policing have become mandatory for officers across the state, and his frank discussions about his own mistakes have opened the eyes of many young recruits. It taught me that injustice, no matter how deeply rooted, can be overcome when people stand together and demand change. Jason's journey from a scared 12-year-old to a confident advocate for justice has inspired countless others to find their own voices. In high schools across the country, students form social justice clubs, naming them Jason's Advocates, in honor of the young man who turned a moment of fear into a lifetime of purpose. In courtrooms and community centers alike, he shares his story, using it as a catalyst for change and a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. That day in the park could have broken me, Jason often says during his speeches. Instead, it became the foundation upon which I built my life's purpose. It has become a case study in police academies, a topic of discussion in sociology classes, and a source of inspiration for grassroots activists across the country. For Jason Thompson, now a promising young lawyer working on civil rights cases, the memory of that day remains vivid, but it no longer fills him with fear or anger. Instead, it fuels his passion for justice and his belief in the power of community action. For in the end, it's not just about what happened in one park on one afternoon, but about the ongoing story we all write together, day by day, choice by choice, as we strive to create a world where every child can play freely, every citizen can feel safe, and every community can thrive in the warm sunlight of equality and understanding. The legacy of that fateful day in Oakwood Park continues to ripple outward, touching lives far beyond the boundaries of one small town. It serves as a powerful reminder that every interaction, every decision, and every moment of courage has the potential to spark a movement, to heal wounds, and to build a world where justice isn't just an ideal, but a lived reality for all. As we close this chapter, we're left with a challenge: to look at our own communities with fresh eyes, to question our assumptions, and to ask ourselves what role we can play in nurturing the seeds of justice. All it needs is the fertile soil of compassion, the sunlight of truth, and the nurturing care of a community committed to change. And so, the story of what happened when a cop arrested a black kid playing in the park continues to unfold, not just in Oakwood, but in countless communities across the nation. Sometimes it was Jason, reflecting on the journey that had shaped his life. Sometimes it was Officer Dillon, finding solace in the tangible reminder of his growth and redemption. And sometimes it was Mr. Bennett, the quiet guardian who had helped guide a community from crisis to transformation. But regardless of who sat there, the message remained the same: that justice, like the most resilient of plants, can take root and grow even in the most unlikely of places. The story of Jason Thompson, Officer Dillon Reeves, and the town of Oakwood had become more than just a local legend. It had become a beacon of hope, inspiring communities across the nation to look within, to challenge the status quo, and to work tirelessly towards a more just and equitable future for all. As night fell and the park emptied, a solitary figure could often be seen sitting on the memorial bench, gazing out at the playground where it all began. And in the fading light, the words on the memorial bench seemed to glow: "Justice grows here." It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, when injustice seems insurmountable, the seeds of change are always present. It takes courage to plant them, patience to nurture them, and a community united to help them flourish. And from those conversations, a new understanding had emerged: that true safety and justice could only be achieved when every member of the community was seen, heard, and valued. As the sun set on another peaceful day in Oakwood Park, children of all backgrounds played together on the playground, their laughter a melody of hope and possibility. Parents chatted on benches, forging friendships across lines that had once divided them. But perhaps the most profound change was in the heart of the community itself. The incident in the park had forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about bias, privilege, and systemic inequalities. It had sparked difficult conversations around dinner tables, in classrooms, and in city council meetings. The park, once the site of such pain and controversy, became a symbol of unity, hosting community events that brought people together across racial and socioeconomic lines. Jason Thompson went on to study law, inspired by Mr. Bennett's example, and driven by a desire to continue fighting for justice. Officer Dillon Reeves, having undergone a profound personal and professional transformation, became a sought-after speaker on police reform and community engagement. The story of what happened when a cop arrested a black kid playing in the park had become more than just a cautionary tale. It had become a blueprint for transformation, a call to action for communities across the nation. In the years that followed, Oakwood became a model for community policing and racial reconciliation. Crime rates fell as trust between law enforcement and citizens grew. This bench is more than just a place to sit. It's a reminder that change is possible, that our voices matter, and that together we can build a world where every child feels safe, respected, and free to just be a kid. As applause erupted, Jason's words hung in the air, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of hope. Bennett, the man who had become like a second father to him, nodding encouragingly, and he saw Officer Dillon, a man transformed by the power of accountability and compassion. Taking a deep breath, Jason began to speak. "A year ago, I stood in this park feeling powerless and alone. Today, I stand here surrounded by a community that has shown me the true meaning of justice and solidarity." It was a simple stone bench, engraved with the words, "Justice grows here." At the dedication ceremony, Jason and Officer Dillon stood side by side, a powerful symbol of healing and hope. As Jason cut the ribbon, officially dedicating the memorial, he looked out at the gathered crowd, a sea of faces representing the diversity and unity of their community. He saw his mother, tears of pride shining in her eyes. He saw Mr. He faced disciplinary action from his department, but more importantly, he faced the task of rebuilding trust with the community he had sworn to serve. He volunteered for additional training, became involved in youth mentoring programs, and worked tirelessly to prove that one mistake did not define his character. 1 year after the incident in the park, a new memorial was unveiled on the very spot where Jason had been handcuffed. Bennett as his mentor, he began speaking at schools and community events, sharing his story and inspiring others to stand up against injustice. His courage and resilience touched hearts across the nation, turning a moment of trauma into a catalyst for progress. For Officer Dillon, the journey of redemption was long and challenging. Bennett and other community leaders, new policies were implemented for community policing. Officers underwent enhanced training in de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity. Youth outreach programs were established, creating opportunities for positive interactions between law enforcement and young people. Jason, mind once shy and reserved, found his voice as an advocate for change. With Mr. I can't change what happened, but I can promise you this. I will do everything in my power to make sure it never happens again. His words were met with a mix of skepticism and cautious hope. Change, the community realized, would not come overnight. It would require ongoing dialogue, education, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. In the weeks and months that followed, Oakwood saw a transformation. Under the guidance of Mr. As he listened to Jason speak, he felt a profound sense of shame wash over him. When it was his turn to address the crowd, he stood, his usual confidence replaced by genuine remorse. "I became a police officer because I wanted to protect people," Dillon began, his voice thick with emotion. "But that day in the park, I failed in that duty. I let my preconceptions and biases cloud my judgment, and in doing so, I caused harm to a child and to this community. I felt scared and alone. No kid should ever have to feel that way, especially not for just being themselves." His words struck a chord, resonating with parents who saw their own children in Jason's story, with minorities who had experienced similar encounters, and with community members who had long turned a blind eye to systemic injustices. Officer Dillon Reeves, to his credit, also attended the meeting. The community center was packed to capacity, with overflow crowds spilling out into the parking lot, all united in their demand for justice and reform. Jason, showing a courage that belied his young age, stood before the assembled crowd, his voice trembling but determined as he recounted his experience. "I've always been taught to respect the police," he said, his eyes scanning the sea of faces before him. But that day in the park, I didn't feel respected. He looked at Jason and Tanya, seeing not a potential threat, but a frightened child and a worried mother. For the first time since the incident began, doubt crept into his mind. In the days that followed, the arrest of Jason Thompson became a rallying cry for change. Mr. Bennett, leveraging his influence and legal expertise, called for a town hall meeting to address the underlying issues of racial profiling and police accountability. "I didn't do anything wrong, I swear." As mother and son reunited, Elijah turned his attention back to Officer Dillon, who stood awkwardly to the side, the center of a growing storm of public scrutiny. "Officer Reeves, I think it's time we had a serious discussion about what transpired here today. Not just for Jason's sake, but for the sake of our entire community." Dillon nodded, the weight of his actions beginning to settle heavily on his shoulders. When she spotted Jason, safe in the protective presence of Elijah Bennett, she ran towards him, gathering him in her arms with a fierce, desperate embrace. "Oh, baby, are you okay? Did they hurt you?" Tanya's voice was choked with emotion as she ran her hands over Jason's face and arms, checking for any sign of injury. Jason clung to his mother, the floodgates of his emotions finally bursting open. "Mom, I was so scared." Within minutes, social media was ablaze with video clips and outraged comments. Local news vans began to arrive, their satellite dishes reaching towards the sky like accusing fingers. Amidst the growing chaos, a car screeched to a halt at the park's entrance. Tanya Thompson burst out, her eyes wild with fear and anger as she scanned the crowd for her son. With a resigned sigh, he reached for his keys. As the handcuffs fell away, Jason rubbed his wrists, his body shaking with suppressed sobs. Elijah placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder, offering a reassuring smile. "It's all right now, son. Why don't you tell me your name and we'll get this all sorted out?" While Elijah comforted Jason, the news of the incident spread like wildfire through the community. "I've been sitting on that bench for the past hour, and I can assure you, the only disturbance I've witnessed is the one currently taking place. Now, I strongly suggest you remove those handcuffs and allow this young man to return to his friends and family." The tension in the air was palpable as Dillon weighed his options. Pride warred with reason in his mind as he looked from the resolute face of Elijah Bennett to the tear-stained cheeks of Jason Thompson. Dillon shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of the growing crowd of onlookers, many with phones raised, capturing the unfolding scene. "Sir, I understand your concern," Dillon began, his voice less certain now. "But I have a duty to maintain order and investigate any potential issues in the community." Elijah took a step closer, his voice low and measured. "Officer Reeves. It is Reeves, isn't it?" His eyes widened slightly as he recognized the well-known attorney. "Mr. Bennett, this is police business, sir. I'm just following protocol with a potential disturbance." Elijah's gaze flicked between the officer and Jason, noting the tears streaming down the boy's face. "I see. And can you tell me what disturbance a child playing in a public park could have caused that would warrant handcuffs?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. He reached into his pocket, retrieving his phone and quickly activating the video recording function. As he approached the officer and the visibly distraught child, Elijah's mind raced, considering the best way to defuse the situation without escalating tensions. "Excuse me, officer," Elijah called out, his deep voice resonating with authority. "May I ask what seems to be the problem here?" Dillon turned, startled by the interruption. Not here, not now, not to him. As Officer Dillon began to lead Jason towards his patrol car, neither of them noticed the solitary figure watching from a nearby bench. Mr. Elijah Bennett, a prominent local attorney and community leader, had come to the park seeking a moment of peace after a long day in court. Instead, He found himself witness to a scene that made his blood run cold. With practiced calm, Elijah stood, brushing off his impeccably tailored suit. In his mind, he was already constructing a narrative, one of potential troublemakers, of disorder that needed to be nipped in the bud. "I'm going to need you to come with me for a few minutes, Jason. We need to sort this out." Before Jason could protest, before he could even fully comprehend what was happening, he felt the cold metal of handcuffs encircling his wrists. Tears welled up in his eyes as fear gripped his heart. This couldn't be happening. "Yes, sir. Just a few blocks over on Maple Street. I come here almost every day after school." The officer's frown deepened. "Uh-huh. And what exactly were you and your friends up to just now? It looked like you were causing quite a commotion." Confusion clouded Jason's young face. "We were just playing tag, sir. That's all. We weren't trying to bother anyone." But Dylan wasn't listening. As he got closer, he could see the stern set of Dylan's jaw, the way his hand rested near his hip, uncomfortably close to his holstered weapon. "What's your name, son?" Dylan asked, his tone clipped and professional. Jason, sir. Jason Thompson," the boy replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Dylan's eyes narrowed as he looked Jason up and down. "Do you live around here, Jason? I don't think I've seen you in this park before." Jason nodded, swallowing hard. "In the red shirt." Officer Dylan's voice carried across the playground, sharp and authoritative. "Come here for a second." Jason froze, his mind racing. Had he done something wrong? Was he in trouble? He looked around, hoping to catch his friends' eyes, but they had all taken a few steps back, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. With leaden feet, Jason walked towards the officer, each step feeling like a mile. Jason was breathless, his heart pounding with exertion and joy as he ducked behind the slide, narrowly avoiding being tagged. He peeked out, scanning for his friends, when a movement at the edge of his vision caught his attention. The sight of the approaching police officer sent a jolt of unease through his body. A learned response drilled into him through countless family discussions and news reports. "Hey, you there." He found himself focusing on one boy in particular, slightly taller than the others, with a red t-shirt that seemed to flash like a warning signal as he darted between his friends. Before he could fully process his thoughts, Dylan was opening his car door, his hand instinctively brushing his belt as he stepped out into the warm afternoon air. He began to walk towards the playground, his presence casting a long shadow across the sun-dappled grass. It was this instinct, honed by years on the beat, that now prickled at the back of his neck as he watched the group of boys gather near the playground. Dylan couldn't quite put his finger on what bothered him about the scene. The kids weren't doing anything overtly wrong, just running, laughing, playing an impromptu game of tag. But something about their energy, the way they moved with such unbridled enthusiasm, struck him as disruptive. Across the park, Officer Dylan Reeves sat in his patrol car, eyes scanning the scene before him. At 32, Dylan was a 7-year veteran of the force, his once idealistic view of police work tempered by the harsh realities of the job. He prided himself on his ability to spot trouble before it started, to sense the undercurrents of potential disorder in even the most peaceful settings. As he coasted into the park, the tension in his shoulders began to melt away. Here, among the swings and slides, the color of his skin didn't matter. Here, he was just Jason, fast runner, expert tag player, and loyal friend. He spotted his buddies near the monkey bars, their excited waves drawing a wide grin across his face. Leaning his bike against a nearby tree, Jason jogged over, ready to lose himself in the simple pleasure of play. 12-year-old Jason Thompson pedaled his second-hand blue bicycle down the familiar streets of his neighborhood, the warm breeze ruffling his closely cropped hair. His backpack, laden with homework and dreams, bounced gently against his spine as he navigated the gentle slopes leading to the park. For Jason, this daily ritual was more than just an after-school activity. It was his slice of freedom, a chance to shed the weight of expectations and simply be a kid. What happened? When a cop arrested a black kid playing in the park, not knowing who was watching. Imagine a quiet afternoon in a beautiful suburban park, and then everything changes in an instant. What happens when someone with power makes a decision that impacts a young life forever? You won't believe the truth behind this story. Stay with us, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that will change the way you see the world.